Hey everybody, your old pal Shawn here. We have a great episode for you today. We're going to discuss the recent Aubrey Marcus podcast. We're going to talk about sex, spirituality, dating, monogamy, polyamory, and abuse. But before we get started, please, if you like what we're doing, give this a like, a follow, a share, a subscribe. Send this to people. Leave us your comments. I'd love to hear what you think. Now, one last thing, if you are in a good financial position, please consider checking out our givesendgo.com/SZP. Anything that comes in will go right back to the podcast, I promise. Now let's get started. I'm going to start this off with a bit of an update. You might have noticed there haven't been new episodes recently, and because of that, you might wonder, did I give up on the podcast? And no, I didn't. I'm trying to remain very neutral in my tone because I want to have a high quality service for you. However, I don't want to become super repetitive either. And I'm working on new ways to present this information. As I've talked about before, I'm going to have a Building Bridges series where I'll go into controversial subjects. And I'm going to do a lot of research for these, and I'm going to need higher production quality for them as well. And we're going to steel man different positions in these subjects and try and see if there are underlying values that we can try and bridge that gap and de-radicalize people through. But it takes a lot of time for one person with a full-time job to get through all of that and then compile it, and then I don't have any idea really how to edit things, and so that's what we have to look forward to in the future. But what I am going to try and do is get better quality videos out. Soon I'm changing positions with my job. I'll have a daylight schedule where I can be awake when the fucking sun is up. Probably shouldn't have done that. This is now demonetized, I'm sure. But anyway, I'm not making money off of these at the moment anyway, so Anyway, I'm taking this time to think about how I can bring you better quality service. I don't want the episodes to be boring and repetitive. I want them to be good, but I'm not trying to have like a snap judgment news show where I pretend I know everything about subjects as I come up. Is there a virus? Suddenly I'm a doctor. Is there a war? Suddenly I'm a geopolitical expert. Is there something going on with the economy? Suddenly I pretend I'm an expert in the subject. I'm not looking to do that. I'm trying to bring higher quality things, and as I said, because a lot of my bigger projects are going to take a lot of time, I think what I'm going to do is try and have shorter videos on a very specific topic so we can keep engaged every week, keep the channel growing, and keep us connected. And I'm going to do one-off clips, and I'm going to each week, and I'm going to clip up some of the previous episodes so we have shortened versions of things we've already covered. And from there, exactly what format the podcast itself is going to take, I'm not sure. We'll find out. But I'm going to keep growing this and trying to figure out a way to bring you a really beneficial service, because I'm not just doing this because it's fun. I'm doing this because I really care about our futures, care about shifting culture and consciousness in a better direction. So that's what's going on with me. Now let's get to the matter at hand. Recently, Aubrey Marcus. If you don't know him, he's an entrepreneur, founder of the health and wellness and nutrition and fitness company called On It. I don't believe he's still technically the owner, but I think he's associated with it somehow. He has like spiritual events, gatherings, retreats and things that he offers. He has apps and book and different kinds of things. And he has a podcast. I wouldn't describe myself as a big fan of the podcast, but over the years, I think I've watched about 10 episodes, and he had some really cool guests on. But besides those really cool guests I watched, there have been many episodes where he describes his trying to figure out love, sex, desire, relationships. And he had his ex-fiance on, and he had different partners he was with on. And, they actually share in a pretty touching, intimate way how they're trying to figure things out. How you might be in love with someone, but suddenly you have this very present desire rising up to know them at some other level. Sometimes it's romantically, sometimes it's sexually. He's trying to figure this out in these episodes, right? And I have to tell you, if you actually watch those episodes, it's pretty touching with how serious and how honest they're trying to be. Because they all have a spiritual bend, they're trying not to repress their emotions and just say, okay, I just love you, and repress any confusion that they have. They're trying not to have a hard rule about it. They're trying to discuss it and see, if they allow some type of poly experience. How can they grow through this? Can they do something with that? And this has been the pattern of a lot of the things he did. Eventually, he got involved with the woman who's now his wife, Vailana. And I'm not going to go into tremendous detail about this, but it was like kind of harrowing, and he was in a poly thing, and she was never into that. But, guys kept cheating on her, and, but he just felt this tremendous connection to her, and she felt very connected to him. And, when she broke up with her guy and, he cut himself loose, from his previous relationships, they started courting at different levels, and, this powerful bond built. And so many of us had the impression that when he and Vailana got serious, that it was a monogamy, a classic monogamy, that there was just two of them together. Now, maybe I misheard, maybe I misremembered, but this was the impression that I had when the two of them got together and they started talking about this. Now, Shawn, why are you talking about another person's relationship? And honestly, I don't care about this. Whatever consenting adults want to do whatever with whoever, I'm not involved. The reason I'm talking about this is there are a lot of different competing narratives that people have about what's going on. So I want to address it, and because I have some related kind of experience that might be insightful or helpful to the dialogue. That's the only reason I'm talking about it. So Aubrey and Vailana, they got together, and in this recent episode, at the beginning, it became very apparent that they like to play. It seemed like sometimes they'd pick up a girlfriend for the weekend or for like a brief period, and they would have some type of interaction with them. But it was always figured in like, hey, Aubrey and Vailana, they're equal partners, and anyone else is like a brief visitor into their world. Aubrey might have an interaction with somebody briefly, or Vailana might have had some interaction with somebody briefly, but it's these two, the solid foundation of this whole thing. It was mostly a monogamy with possibilities of play for both of them or one of them or whatever. That seems to be the arrangement they had. And eventually, they met they were in Miami, and they both had the impression they wanted to find a playmate. And so they're going on a dating app, but they were going to be leaving Miami shortly. Well, quickly on Aubrey's second swipe, he finds this woman that he feels very, very drawn to. He hears this voice, Aubrey, thou shalt hunt down this chick. And anyway, he gets on the app, swipes. This is the one you're looking for, Aubrey. Vailana, look too. And so they're both into this girl. And they send a message like, hey, I'm sorry if this sounds really creepy or really weird, but, we just got onto this app and we sent this out and found you. We're interested in getting to know you. And she just happened to have downloaded the app the day before, and she's going to be leaving Miami soon anyway. And Vailana has this powerful Hawaiian heritage, and this woman, Alana, also has lived in Hawaii for a long time. And so they're hitting it off, and it's real powerful, great connection. They all seem to have great affection for each other. They have this great dynamic. And at some point, they're traveling together. They're going all around. They're interacting in some ways. And at some point, they're in Egypt, and they go to the Temple of Isis, and they're in the Holy of Holies, and Aubrey gets the sense that God's talking to him. And the message he gets is, Aubrey, both of these women will bear your children. And he's like, what? And it's like, Aubrey, both of these women shall bear your children. And he's like really, really taken aback by this because his marriage to Vailana is very important to him. And he's like really emotionally upset. He distances himself from the two. And he's like trying to reconcile, like, hey, I wasn't on any type of plant medicine at the time. What's going on? He's in this weird place. He doesn't want to risk losing Vailana because, if you impregnate two women, that's a pretty big deal. It's not just, hey, you got a partner for the weekend or like a short time that you're kind of, hey, we're friendly, ha ha ha, and then you go on. That's a far more substantial commitment. So it took a little while for Vailana to say, hey, Aubrey, I'm in tune with you. You really seem shaken. What's up? And then he says, well, this is what happened. And then at first she's cool with it until it sets in. And then she's very, very upset by this because she never really had a successful monogamy to begin with. She kind of wanted that. But then they were playing, and that was all good because she was the main squeeze, and anyone else was a temporary flavoring to their life. And so this woman, Alana, she eventually gets told about what's going on between the two and the voice that Aubrey feels he heard. And eventually, over a long time, they're trying to figure out, they're trying to work out, everyone loves each other and what's going on. And eventually this is described as a new goddess enters the constellation. So rather than going into every moment of their trials and tribulations and their emotional revelations and at the twists and turns of how they felt at each particular moment and what insights they had, I just want to say, hey, the fact that these people are coming on and sharing openly this thing that they knew they'd get a lot of blowback for, sharing their most intimate lives and confusions and doubts and fears, that's to be commended. I'm watching I think a lot of the people critiquing it, either this is all very new to them or they didn't really watch the episode, or maybe I had more context because I watched a couple other of the relationship episodes with Aubrey and his ex-fiance and friends and how Vailana eventually got into this and met him. And so I was more familiar with the backstory. The impression that I got, now I could be wrong. I don't know Vailana, Alana, Aubrey, none of these people. I know none of them. The sense that I get is that they're all very serious in their spiritual path. They all want to try and be honorable in their connections, and they all have some kind of connection with each other, and they don't really know what to do about that. Because it could provoke a lot of insecurity and fear. You could see in the podcast there are moments where Vailana is very emotional discussing some of these things. So I just want to take a moment to commend them for that. Now, there are competing narratives that are rising around this subject. And I want to give some voice to these views. One view is that Aubrey is driven by his ego, by his shadow, by his arrogance. He's either out of being crazy and spiritually bypassing his responsibility, or out of some type of egoic manipulation plan. He's trying to rope God and spiritual jargon into talking Vailana into letting him have a second girlfriend. In the podcast, he gives some voice to this. He says, "Hey guys, I know some of you guys out there are going to think that, oh man, Aubrey has this all figured out. How'd he get 2 girlfriends?" And he highly recommends that nobody does what he's doing. That it's very dangerous, that it's very, very painful, that it's very, very destructive. But as they all feel they're quite mature in their spiritual path, they're all very serious about trying to care for each other and be honest about their feelings as they develop each step. It's like a calculated risk in order to try and manage their desires and emotions and grow together. Now, the narrative that's arising about this is, okay, Aubrey, either consciously or not, is manipulating and taking advantage of Vailana and using her spiritual values as a way to make her sacrifice her preferences so that Aubrey can get more younger pussy. And that he pulled in an older mentor to involved in this whole thing so that they can try and console and manipulate the women into both accepting Aubrey's schlong. And that's a view. And so many of us have seen the spiritual guy take advantage of women. Okay, this is a stereotype. And it's a stereotype for a reason, because it happens all the fucking time. You could just go to the local yoga studio and you see all the flexi bendy girls, and the guy's like, "Oh yeah, I just have to open your hips and grind my crotch against your pelvis to open your chakra so your fascia releases and you could get deeper into the pose." Meanwhile, Johnny Old Man over here, he can't even get into the most vague position. He really needs support, but the sleazy yoga teacher isn't helping him. He's helping the hot young chickies with the nice asses. And, that's the fear. That's the concern. And the idea is, okay, Aubrey somehow talked Vailana into gradually having partners, and one step at a time, slippery slope, he ended up talking her into accepting another woman into the house. That's the big fear. Now, I'm not in their psyches. I don't know any of these people. I could say that pattern exists in the world. I'm not going to be audacious enough to say it exists in them. I'm not their therapist, their psychologist, their friend, nothing. So I'm not going to critique what's going on in all of them, or how psychologically fragile or resilient any of them are. The other narrative that I've been hearing is kind of a contrary voice. And it's going along the lines of this. So many people want to protect the feminine And they're saying that the dangerous masculine is preying on these women and taking advantage of the feminine. And I wrote some of this down. That there. However, that this whole attitude is disregarding the strength of the feminine and of these women. The perspective is these women are very advanced in their spiritual path. They are consenting adults. And to say that they are weak and dumb and easily being misled by this guy, it's kind of gaslighting them, and it's kind of infantilizing them rather than protecting them. It's saying that they're too dumb, too weak, too naive, too uncertain in their power, so they're just crumbling to the wills and desires of this man. And the idea is that is underestimating the scope and power and vulnerability and truthfulness and the honest place that these women are. That this is something that they're deciding from their own area of agency and authority. And they're not being misled by this man. They're opening their hearts in this complicated situation because they want to love, they want to grow, and they're trying to find the best way to do it. And to say that they're just being misled is to kind of look down upon these women. It's kind of a misogynistic view to frame them in. Now, I don't know. These women in particular. To me, I could see both ways. And I have a lot of experience in this particular path. That's why I'm deciding to share this. The idea that Aubrey is taking advantage of them, some of the comments I've seen are, what sacrifices is Aubrey making? It seems like Vailana is the one sad and having all the problems and making all the sacrifices to let Alana come into their lives. And to that, I say, well, you could definitely see his concerns, unless he's some amazing actor, which, might be possible, but he has concerns. Because he's saying, he's not taking anything special for himself. And, Alana and Vailana are allowed to fuck other people. He said, even in doggy style, even oral sex. And he said, I'm not sure how much farther than that I'm able to go. But, that's there. And he does seem to care for Vailana a great deal. And he doesn't want to lose that. And by bringing Alana in, there is a danger to that. These are some of the concerns that are being raised. Now, let me give voice and acknowledge some of the genuine concerns of spirituality and sex. This is a very confusing scenario. So there's a book that I read this section of it. And it's called Spiritual Transmission. And basically the gimmick of it is I forget the author's name, so I apologize. But they interview a variety of spiritual leaders, and they talk about some of the big concerns about corruption, about sex with the leader and students and all this kind of thing. And a lot of the spiritual teachers, when they're addressing the sex between a student and a teacher, for example, they say, perhaps if the student is very advanced on their path and they're very responsible and they're more on equal footing with the teacher, they're adults, they're closer in age, it's more realistic that this could happen. But when it's like the older guy and like the hot 20-something-year-old, and often it's too uneven, even if the 20-something's very serious on their path, just between admiration and lack of experience in life and a lot of these things, it's a far more precarious situation and far more unlikely that they could have a healthy relationship. But beyond that, we've all heard of the Bikram story, where the founder of Bikram Yoga is telling his some of his instructors and some of his students, hey, you were my wife in a past life, and you're mine, and if it's your karma to be with me, you need to open yourself to me so that you can awaken your full potential. And I remember reading an article from a famous yoga teacher who was studying under him at one point, and he would demonstrate yoga adjustments and walk behind her and like open her hips and grind against her and give his speech, and he'd tell her about her karma and about her soul connection to him and all this kind of thing. And that was very hard on her. But there's a lot of this. I mean, even if we look at the Catholic Church, the spiritual authorities, the priests, the cardinals, the bishops, the ones that everyone trusts, and then people go to them in vulnerability and openness, and they're not allowed to have sex. They're celibate. And well, this can be a problem because they're human, they have temptations. It's difficult for most people to deal with that kind of thing. And when you have positions of power and opportunity, it's hard to, oh, you're a sinful girl? Well, don't worry, the Lord can forgive you. Let me apply my healing ointment from my cock. I'm trying to add light to this kind of thing because this whole topic can be very, very dark. And it's, then they would do this with altar boys and different members of their church and people who were entrusted to them. And because of their religious authority, they were protected. They couldn't be touched. They couldn't be blamed for anything. How dare you talk about Father O'Malley like that? He did not do those things to you. That you want to go to hell, you want to send your family to hell for blaspheming the church, all this kind of thing. We could look at John of God, South American kind of spiritual healer, quote unquote. You can see videos of him with a scalpel conducting like surgeries on people just stand there and he'd cut into their eyes or their abdomen or different things and start yanking on them. And the people wouldn't really react in a negative way. They'd say positive shit, but lo and behold, he was like keeping women in cages and breeding them and raising the kids to be bred and taking advantage of his position. Lots of terrible, terrible things. It's so easy. This is a spiritual stereotype for a reason because you can see it. So I'm going to share some stories, some that I've heard, some that I've encountered from people, and some of the things in my own personal life to try and give context to this. So, for example, I'm an acquaintance of a young woman who was very spiritual. I believe she was in her late teens or very early 20s, and she went to like a personal growth seminar. And there she met this guy, and she just knew she had to marry the guy because all the signs lined up, and they had the synchronicities and the timing. And, it's a very, very intense relationship, and they're so spiritual. And he was saying that he was actually the reincarnation of some deity. I forget. Maybe it was Shiva. Maybe it was something. And, he kept trying to get her pregnant and saying, you have to do this because our child is going to be Zeus or something. And he kept trying to knock her up. And that eventually was a very emotionally and psychologically abusive thing. He was preying. Now, it sounds like the guy was also mentally unwell himself, but that doesn't negate the harm that is being done to this poor young woman. And so she's in this like cloud, and she's talking to her guides, and they're going to South America, they're traveling all around, and he keeps trying to knock her up. Anyway, long story short, eventually she gets free. She finds Jesus, chases away all of her guides, which she interprets now as demons. and she seems happier. She's married to somebody else, and that's the long and short of it. But so often you encounter this kind of thing. A friend of mine, for example, related to me that her one boyfriend believed that he was possessed by many spirits. One was Jack the Ripper, one was he called himself Batman. He said, according to the prophecy, she was going to be triangle, which meant good, evil, neutral, and he had to fuck her to keep her at bay. Like all kinds of weird things. This exists in the spiritual circle. I know of a female guru, pretty well known, busy for decades, thousands and thousands of students around the world, and was known to try and get people on drugs, to tell people, oh, you're in a couple? Couples do not exist in God. That's an abomination. If I tell you two to split up and fuck other people, that's because they need it. That's because you need it. That's what God wants. So do you want to be free, or do you want to maintain your security in your little ego fears? Go. And, people would do that. And I knew a woman who was satanically, ritually abused by a cult. She was taken in when she was younger by a charismatic cult leader who was supposed to be the devil. And they did satanic sexual rituals, and eventually she got pregnant. Supposedly her son was supposed to be the Antichrist. Eventually she got out of that, and her son came out very schizophrenic and challenged, unfortunately. There are so many of these stories, we can recount them. You got the Children of God, where their version of was, okay, Jesus loves you through sex, so you have to have sex with all of the leaders and all the other people in the congregation, because if not, then you're rejecting Jesus. There's Dawn Watson, actually, is pretty famous for having been through this type of thing. She was in the I'm Not Your Guru thing that Tony Robbins did. I exchanged a couple messages with her years back. But, she had a powerful spiritual journey trying to heal from this. We all are aware of spiritual folks abusing their people. So I'm not blaming people for being extra sensitive when Aubrey and his mentor that he brought into this is there, and he's saying, oh, but God says I have to knock both of you up. Like that for a lot of people, that rings a lot of bells. Like, sure. God wants you to get some younger pussy, and you're gonna give them both the cream. Is that what's going on? Yeah. Tell us another one, Aubrey. Where's the part about sell your business and, give it to the poor and come follow me? Where's the part about that? But I digress. So I'm going to share some experiences that I've had that offer some context to this. I've been involved in a lot of spiritual groups over the years, and I've had a lot of teachers, many of which are private citizens whose names I'm not going to bring up. And I'm not going to bring up the names of anybody in these stories because I care about them. I care about their privacy. And frankly, none of them want their stories public. And if I gave detail, I would have to rewrite the stories for them not to be identified by their groups. And then that would just be fiction then. But I want to share some stuff that gives me context to this. So I was always like a monogamy temperament kind of guy. I wanted so bad when I was younger to have a soulmate because it was the idea that there's someone else. I'm not going to be alone forever in the universe. That was a tremendous fear of mine. And I also felt like I had a certain code of honor. Like you couldn't just fuck whoever you wanted to fuck. Originally, when I was a teenager, I thought, okay, I won't kiss anybody unless they'd never kissed anybody. Well, I eventually loosened up on that, but it eventually became extreme loyalty. Where, okay, before we met, maybe you've kissed, maybe you've made out with somebody or whatever, but from this point on, there's nothing. And I remember my girlfriend telling me that her dog licked her leg, and I was so fucking jealous that I wanted to kill her dog because that's my leg. And she used to, and I never told her she can't hang out with friends. I never tried to restrain her. I never tried to keep her from people. But I often express concerns, I don't trust these folks. And turned out I was often right. There were often people trying to prey on this poor girl. So you get the gist that I had a very strict monogamy kind of thing. And I was into martial arts and spiritual practice and occult techniques, and that's all I did. I thought the end of the world was coming, and the way to practice, the way to get better was get better at hurting people. And I figured the background I had, occult practice, seemed to be make a lot of sense from where I was at that time. I'm not going to get into that because that's going to be a whole different podcast if I do. Number of years later, I took on a personal training client. I didn't have many, but I had a few. And, in a month, she lost like 4 pant sizes, and her migraines went away, and her carpal tunnel symptoms went away, and she's feeling a lot better and getting definition and all this kind of thing. And I didn't see a lot of women at this time. And I didn't have a lot of money at this time. And she was into meditation and spirituality, and she wanted to take meditation classes from me as well. And so I did that. And then she talked to a friend who's now a friend of ours. And, I started giving meditation classes at their church, at his church. And she started to invite some of her friends and to the classes and support, and it was very cool. At a certain point, I started to realize that I was attracted to her, and I had romantic feelings, and I didn't like that for a number of reasons. She wasn't my type. There were a lot of things that were major red flags against my rule structure. But one of the biggest parts was I didn't want to be one of those creepy guys who would hit on their clients, I'm your trainer, but I'll train that ass, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't want to be one of those guys. But eventually, one of my teachers, who I'd only talked to long distance, but we'd been talking for 5-6 years at that point. He started giving seminars, and we thought, okay, come on down and give a seminar. And he had to cancel one last minute, but then there was, okay, he'll just come down and give us a private training. And I thought, oh man, this is cool. And the first day, good event. And at the end of the class, I'm looking at her, I'm like, wow, this is a beautiful girl. And I'm gonna tell her how I feel, but I don't want to overshadow the class. I'll talk to her after the seminar. Well, then next day, seminar ends, and he ends up doing a spiritual technique with her and they're like linked together. She feels very open to him at that moment. And then he says, okay, Shawn, it's been a pleasure. The two of us are going to go have dinner now. And then they went and see a movie, and they eventually got together physically. And I knew it, and I was very, very, very angry. They didn't tell me explicitly, but you could get the vibe. And she was so different the next day, um, dramatically different. And anyway, I couldn't really blame them too much because, for one, I never said anything to her, and two, I never said anything to him. They're free adults. But something happened to set the stage for that seminar. One was, for a couple of years, I was I chalked it up to a diet I had, made my joints weak, and so martial arts began to hurt me more to practice. And like if I'm trying to pick somebody up, the weight would be on my knees or on my hip or on my elbow, and like it would hurt a lot. And also all of the stretching I was doing made my double jointed body unstable, and so I felt like certain kicks, I would feel my leg coming out of the joint, and in certain exercises, I felt just like unstable. So I'd lost all my martial arts confidence, and physically I was getting weaker. I was like 140 something pounds at like 5'11". I was just very, very thin. I could do a lot of push-ups. I could do a lot of different squat variations or whatnot. But other than that, and even my push-ups were imbalanced. My shoulder had something funky going on. But long story short, I was in a physically weaker state where I lost all my confidence in my ability to physically represent myself. And also, I developed an eye infection in my left eye, which was my dominant eye at the time. It's not anymore. And it became big and red, and I couldn't see. And I was just like so congested all the time. I was going through boxes and boxes and boxes of tissues all the time, and nothing was treating it. And eventually it got a little better. I was, after months and applying saline solution, washing it out all the time. And, eventually it got a little better, but not substantial. And all I was doing at that time was basically giving personal training classes to this girl and looking down in the darkness of my room and trying to listen to videos that could console me. But while I did that, all of the self-image psychology practices that I did, all of the positive qigong and, inner smile kind of shit that I was doing seemed so superficial because that cracked. And beneath that, I just found tons and tons of repressed emotions from my life, and a lot of pain and patterns that I didn't want to see or acknowledge. And I felt really terrible. And by really terrible, I mean, for the next year, from top of my head down to the bottom, I just felt heavy and dirty all the time. Every pore of my body felt dirty. I felt pain, hurting, kind of breathing kind of hurt. I felt like heartbreak all the time. I was cycling through intense anger and hatred, both outside and self-hatred, and like deep sadness and disappointment and guilt and shame, fear. I felt terrible. And I felt that way all the time. In my whole life, I had never felt this bad. And I felt that for a year. On top of that, I was doing 5 hours of meditative practices at the time. I was doing eventually what became thousands of hours of Vipassana because I wasn't. And if you're not familiar, Vipassana is basically you sit, you breathe, you pay attention to your emotions, see what rises. And, eventually the energy I had was increasing, and, that was pushing up against everything I had inside. And, I'd have my arms popping, and sometimes, I'd feel like hot razor knives going into my anus or into my genitals, like I'm being stabbed. I'd be sometimes it'd be so dramatic, the energetic rises, that I'd like fly into the wall. Like it sounds, I remember banging my head off of a wall at a Perkins. It was really ridiculous, but this is what I felt. And like, I'd feel it coming around people, and I'd like really try and block it, but it would like hurt more if I try and like restrain it. And so I was having this really weird kind of experience. Come a month later, it came out. She told me everything. Teacher told me everything. He came back down, gave another quote unquote seminar. But basically all he was doing was like, okay, we're going to go talk. We're going to watch a movie, and then they go fuck again. And so, and then he gave a class, and so I'm not going to get into those details because it's not related to the topic at hand. But needless to say, I was miserable for about a year. And I had the worst pain that I felt ever in my life in a single moment. And that moment lasted for about a year. And basically on the anniversary of that year, we were at another event. This one was not in Pennsylvania. This was in Texas. We had moved to be around more spiritual people. And like, I was at the hotel, and, I saw the two of them. We off and on had a thing, but, it was mostly I was a good substitute for when he wasn't there. Now, we had stopped like 9 months before, but, the feelings are still there, and the competitiveness. I always had this thing about I wanted to be number one, but I always had people who were way better than me, like rubbing it, and they were real cocky too, rubbing it in my face. And I had these vast insecurities, and having to deal with the fact that, okay, I'm getting all my spiritual guidance now from this guy who's fucking this girl, and he said he wasn't going to touch her, but now he is. And now I'm watching them enter his hotel room for another fuck. And I'm standing there, and I'm like, what the fuck? There was a time when I could relay every minute of this in extreme detail. But now so much of it's foggy. I have done so many hours of Vipassana and other practices that I haven't been able to tap into the emotion of this for years. But I'm trying to put myself close enough so that I can articulate what happened. And then, he's going in there, and I'm standing outside of his room, and I'm just like staring at the door, and it's a mostly glass door, which is funky. And it's just like a privacy curtain over the door, which was kind of goofy. And I'm like, I could snap this fucking door, and I could just like tear this guy apart, but then that'd be traumatic for her and for tons of people. And eventually they finish their thing. He gets up. She comes out crying. She's so overwhelmed. She's touched emotionally and shit. And he's like, oh, hi, Shawn. And I go over to him, and I'm like, I want to assault you. And he goes, I understand. Now, if it weren't for the fact that my martial arts were fucked up, if it weren't for the fact that I had all this emotional stuff released from after my eye went blind. So here's a part I left out, and I have to be fair about this. So the first time he came down, we went to his hotel room, and he goes, Shawn, come here, sit on the bed with me. And he put his hands over my eye, and he's going, and after a couple of minutes, he takes his hands away, and I see better. And I look in the mirror, and my eye isn't fucked up anymore. His eye's fucked up. And then he goes, and then he looks, and his eye's better. And he goes, okay, let's go eat. Now, he had done nice shit for me for about 6 years before that. And there was no group then. There was one guy before me, he disappeared. I was there the whole time. So I was the longest term person. Eventually starts going by a Sanskrit name, but that was 5 years after we started talking to him, 7 years after I was going through his material. It was a long time. And I was in this state with, well, I want there to be a reason behind this. I want to make it through. I want to believe that I could get through I had this vast determination. And anyway, he said, oh, I want you to, I prayed about you. You're very upset. I understand. I want you to spend the rest of the night chanting the Lord's Prayer. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And I'm just sitting there like enraged. Anyway, I do that and mysteriously I felt better. I'm like, I'm still angry, upset, but like so much of the pain was gone. And then I was doing a lot of spiritual practice after that. And I was working on feeling love. And it took me weeks until I had a good day, finally. And then after a little bit, then I had 2 good days in a row. And shortly I had a good week, and a little bit after I had a good month. And eventually I was just feeling this extreme, intense, explosive bliss all the time. And nothing that happened mattered. And I'm like, okay, it all worked. And because I had that unique combination of being weaker than normal and more vulnerable than normal, and being really stubborn and really wanting to grow through all this and not wanting to give up before I was done, it helped a lot. It helped. I got through so much jealousy, so much overprotection, pride, fear, all these kinds of things. So that was very, very helpful. And then I saw him doing different versions of things with other people along the lines of, hey, you two get together. Sometimes he'd recommend a sexual tantric exercise, but usually it was just like, hey, you have equality, you have equality. If you have sex, then that's going to rub off on each other. And it's going to open up new possibilities for both of you. Go do this. Hey, or he'd start sleeping with different people for longer periods of time. And I had the impression, because I actually got some kind of benefit out of this, that's what you're supposed to do. And eventually some of the senior teachers that I'm hearing them talk about folders, which would basically be, okay, you have a sexual student who maybe they had a bad romantic experience and you give them a good one, and that helps shift their association with sex and they could be more open. And sometimes you would see the students that he would have a long-term thing with disappear, and they'd go away and they'd complain. And my idea at the time was, okay, well, maybe the emotional intensity was a little high for them, but the wisdom's going to work in a couple of years. It's going to set in and they're going to be happier and better off for what happened. Right. And because I had a lot of trust, and I saw other people who were newer than me doing this kind of thing. So I started to do that kind of thing, starting in 2013 to about 2015. And at that time period, basically anyone who asked to sleep with me, I did, because I thought, well, if the universe is sending them to me, I must have some experience that's going to help them. And I had a couple students say, hey, this is going to be really good. And then I had some students who were like, for example, I remember at one point there was one woman who was engaged and another woman that was engaged, right? Now, the one woman, she couldn't feel sexual desire unless she felt love. And the other one couldn't feel love unless she felt sexual desire. And I figured, hey, I'm going to flirt with these girls. And I did intend to sleep with the one, never did. But my thought was, okay, I'm going to flirt with these girls until it opens up their possibility for that. And then that's going to break the association, and they'll be able to feel desire more freely and feel love more freely. It eventually ended up where the vast majority of people I slept with were in some kind of relationship. I didn't always know it at the time, but at one point I did. And I was saying, using the explanation my teacher was using, well, sometimes you love your doctor, your general family doctor, but you need a specialist. And are you out of loyalty to your family doctor, you're going to stick with him and keep the condition, or you're going to go to the specialist, go to the person that can help? And so I use this bullshit to justify my actions. And so I was just sleeping with different people. Most of the time I was celibate. I was working a lot at my main job, and when I would travel for seminar, it would be like a buffet. I would have so many options, and so I sometimes one or two, but usually I'd pick one person per seminar, and I'd get involved with them for a time period, and talk to them afterwards. And there were a pile of other people that I would just flirt with online all the time, and I thought this is what I was supposed to do because I thought it worked on me, and So that this is just how it's going to work. Well, another part of this whole practice was you would do some type of deep observation of your emotions. And the idea was the more upset you are, the more you're fighting reality, the more you're in conflict with what is. And so instead of yelling and complaining and fighting what's going on, what you should do, in theory at that time, was sit and look at your emotions and breathe and work through it. And eventually, just like when you go into a stretch in yoga and you breathe into it and eventually the muscles let go. Well, this is the idea emotionally. You might have to look hours at, some type of tension or emotional structure or belief pattern you had for decades, but when it lets go, you're going to have an equivalent of bliss and freedom. And I seem to experience that. So I thought, hey, if I'm temporarily the bad guy in somebody's story, then they're going to have if I'm temporarily the bad guy in somebody's story, but after that, they're free of a lifelong insecurity and they feel happier and they have less pain, it's worth it to me. And so a lot of times the people I'd hook up with would be very, very happy about it. And sometimes there'd be little problems. And we'd argue and I'd say, hey, look, I'm not against you, but you need to breathe. You need to pay attention to your emotions. You need to apply the wisdom, right? Here's some manipulation, right? Here's some shame. And you would point out patterns that you'd see. And the idea was in this culture, you would do that. And that was the way. I saw my teacher do it. Now at certain points, my teacher and I shared girlfriends, and while I didn't love it, it was far from the murderous rage that I used to feel when a dog would lick my girlfriend's leg. It was more like the level of discomfort I felt was more akin to having to run an unwanted errand after a long day at work. That's how I was like, all right, fine, let's get this over with. That kind of attitude. So much of the jealousy was gone, so much of the pain was gone, and in general, I felt fucking great. The emotions I had were, generally speaking, very, very, very positive. I had moments of insecurity that would be pretty sharp. I did have a lot of self-hatred, so if I screwed up something, or if I became aware of a particular flaw, I might be hard on myself for a while, but outside of that, I was generally feeling really good compared to what I did my whole life. So I thought, hey, this is working. And every one of us, especially the high teachers, we were told we were super evolved beings and we're becoming so great, yada, yada, yada. And I had this unique experience. And you know what? I also believed it because I had so many unrelated teachers who never met each other, who gave me some kind of version of, oh, you're destined to spread wisdom to the world. Oh, you're the chosen one. Oh, I had like tarot readers say, oh, you're going to balance the universe. the good and evil of the universe. You're going to do this. You're good. I had so many people say this shit to me. By the time I got to this guy, who was my main teacher at the time, I was still looking at other stuff, but he was my main guy. And he'd been around for years and years at this point, and I was just like, okay, it's what everybody always said about me. So when he's telling me I was going to be greater than Jesus, I'm going to be this great avatar, and I have all this power, and I'm so great, I believed him. And I would see him, because we were sharing girlfriends, I would hear some of the different things he'd say. Like he told our one girlfriend, hey, share girlfriends. I don't really count it as a relationship anymore, because really we didn't talk that much between seminars, and we only met at seminar a couple times a year. So and meanwhile, she's like getting a hammer, because she lived closer to our teacher. So but regardless, there'd be things like, hey, he would say things to her like, hey, I'm supporting the consciousness of the group so that they can reach this point. My animal needs a certain amount of comfort. That's why I brought you along. You agreed to it. So we have to, please, it's like therapy. I need to put yourself at service. And also, you agreed to do this in your soul contract before you were born. If not, you're going to have all this karma. And he'd say this kind of shit to a lot of people. And if people would voice insecurities about it, he would say, look at you. You have this shame. Look at your fear. Oh, you're trying to control God. You're trying to control the way love flows. Look at this insecurity. This is what's keeping you here. This is why you're not at this level and these people are. Because you're fighting. You're fighting. You're trying to keep yourself, trying to hold on to your human control structures instead of faith in God. And at a certain point, I remember arguing with the teacher over and over and over. And when I was going through my thing, every day I'd send him an email. Where's the love, huh? They were supposed to get love. We're supposed to get the bliss. We're supposed to get freedom and oneness and all this shit. Where the fuck is it? Your teachings don't fucking work. And I remember sending him emails like that all the time. But like I said, eventually I actually did get better. So I thought this is what everyone was going to go through. I was just waiting to celebrate with them, how they were going to turn around and everybody was going to be great. And, our former mutual girlfriend eventually left, and she was very against things. And you'd see other people that he got involved with, trickle off. And I just thought, again, one day the wisdom's going to set in. They're going to process enough stuff and they're going to feel the benefit. And I always intended to leave. And I told them I was going to leave 2 years before I did. I said, hey, I'm going to attend one more event, and you're going to give the event at this place on this topic. It's going to be this long. And then after that, that's going to be my last event. I'm going to stop coming around. And then, because I know everything I want to know. And so that's basically what but I argued with the teacher. Hey, you got to stop being sloppy. Got to stop saying all this stuff in public. Whatever you do with consenting adults or whatever is fine, but you can't be so sloppy with where you're saying all this stuff. It makes you look like a cult. Well, that was ignored. One of the things that was really painful for me was I eventually hooked up with a local girl who wasn't connected to this group at all. Now, most of my experience sexually was either with more promiscuous women who were seasoned, or people in this group who were very used to the, hey, you see this situation, you have a lot of shame there. It's covering up some pattern of control, some manipulation. You're holding on to this false hope that you're going to be able to keep this love, but all this kind of thing, right? Well, I had a girl come to a local meditation class of mine, and we developed friends with benefits thing, but she was very inexperienced. wasn't into this kind of thing. But I thought she was really into the wisdom. So I was treating her like any of my other girls, where I would just say, hey, you have this shame, you have this control, you have this fear, you have this guilt. Look at this, you feel this. But she perceived it, because she's from an entirely different lifestyle, as attacks and bullying. And I thought, hey, she's here for the wisdom. She's applying the teachings. It's eventually going to work out. I'm going to be the bad guy in her story for a while, but then she's going to make it on the other side. And like whatever pain she felt from her life involving desire, relationships, it's going to be gone. And she's going to feel so much better because of it. Well, never happened. And from that moment on, around 10 years ago, except for 2 weekends where I hooked up with friends, I've been celibate. Because I realized eventually she wasn't there for the wisdom. She was there because she was attracted to me. And that I was just hurting her really badly for years. And she didn't deserve that. And she was a really good person. And that caused me to look back at, some of the other situations and some of the couples that I was endangering and messing with by flirting with the girl, or sometimes getting sexually involved with the girl. But I still thought kind of highly of my teacher until like 10 years passed. Well, you get the point. After many people left who were complaining, and I was in touch with a lot of them, and not only were many of them not better, many of them were worse. And it never worked itself out. And I was very, very upset about that, because I kept justifying all the shit to myself. I wanted it to be real. And maybe it seemed to work better for people who are like one night stands or something. If someone had a bad sexual experience and then you give them like a pleasant one, it might open them up a little bit. Or if they were never with like a good guy or something, it might open them, or never, were never spoiled, and they could start to see, hey, they're worth it. But, looking back, I saw all of the mistakes I made. And I saw all of the things my teacher did that did not work out. And that's when it really occurred to me. It's easy for people to say no. I would never give in to temptation. If I was tempted, I have integrity, and I hope you do. Maybe you do. A lot of people, when the exact thing they want, when a girl you've always been attracted to, for example, or a man you've always been attracted to, that exact type of person is right there, and they're offering themselves to you, and the love's better than you thought, but they have a partner. But they offer it, and they offer it, and they offer it, and they offer it. And how tempting it might be. How hard it is to say no to what you want over. And how many times can you say no to what you want? For me, I became acutely aware of my weaknesses. So I developed my filtration system, which I talked about in other videos. But the long and the short of it is, I will not sleep with anybody unless they meet my criteria. My criteria is, step one, if I know nothing about you, are you attractive enough to me that I want to know more? Number 2, do we have a good friendship? Is it fun? Is it funny? Am I excited to talk to you? Do we hang out? Is it playful? Is it enjoyable? Do we have some shit in common that we could talk about? Okay, 2. 3, romantically, is there love, intimacy, passion, vulnerability, connectedness? Do we have chemistry? Okay, number 4, are we heading in the same places? Do you want a family? Because I don't. Do you want to live on the beach? I'd rather live in the mountains and the forest. Are you one political ideology that's very, very important to you where you ridicule the other? Because that's not going to work for me. Are you super, super religious and want me to go to church all the time? That's not going to be me. Are you a really family and again, do our values match and align? Do our ambitions and desires for life? Are you super, super extroverted and want to go to parties all the time? That's not going to be me. I like being social, but after a while, it gets to be a chore. And number 5, if they make it through all 4, how's the fucking? Well, nobody has gotten it that far. So I've seen a lot of things like, oh, God wants you to sleep with me. Or, oh, I know this is going to open you up. You have to push beyond your limits, defeat your preferences, and then you'll find God. You have to sleep with me. And the idea is, oh, you could always say no. But it's kind of like a manufactured consent. Because if on one side you're promised, hey, you can be a saint and have all the blessings and power and manifestation ability, and you can know God and peace and love and bliss. All you have to do is fuck me and defeat your preferences. Or you're going to have karma and shame, and you're never going to reach your potential, and you're not going to evolve, you're not going to grow, and you're not going to help anybody. That's framed in a very weird way. So you could see in the Aubrey Marcus Alana constellation how people could project this kind of experience onto them, because you could hear them say, well, Aubrey's saying God's talking to him, that he wants them to bear his children. You could easily see that as that same kind of manipulation. Again, I don't know any of these people. But you could see that kind of fear. It could easily happen. When I look in the coaching industry at some of the people I encountered, I knew this woman, nice, friendly, and she offered a friend of mine a $60,000 coaching program. And the idea of the coaching program was it's going to make you hot and sexy and find a beautiful partner, and everything's going to be great, and you're going to have hot, juicy, passionate sex and all the love you want. And then my friend didn't sign up for this program. And then a few months later, this coach is talking about, oh, my husband ran away with my girlfriend. And it's like, But you're finding people who are desperate, who are willing to do anything, take out loans, bend over backwards, remortgage the house in order to find their partner, in order to feel sexy and desirable and beautiful again. And then this kind of thing. Another coach I saw was, oh, I offer masculine, feminine polarity coaching. You want to have the beautiful relationship and all. And then at the same time, I'm seeing her in groups and seeing her she sent me messages, and she's talking about how her boyfriend left her and she hates herself. She wants to get rid of her dog because she bought it with him. She is depressed. She talked to every psychiatrist and a psychologist and therapist and coach, and the only thing that ever healed her was getting a new penis inside her. And it's like, But yet and she was charging tens of thousands of dollars for her coaching programs. to attract the partner of your dreams and all of this. You know, these coaches, they have dreams, they have ambitions, and they're told that this model, this coaching opportunity is the vehicle to live the dream. It's like multi-level marketing people telling you, hey, all you have to do is train 10 people to do what you do, and all of a sudden you're free, you're living a dream, you have all the money you want, and you could take care of your family, and when grandma has cancer, you could get her the best treatment so she lives, and all this kind of thing. Or it's like a lot of the religious types, like life is hard, but you're going to go to heaven and Jesus is going to love you and it's going to be so beautiful. I'm not saying that's happening or not, you know. But it's the same flavor of pitch. You know, you're getting people who are hurt, getting people who are desperate, and putting them into this. You're getting the coaches who desperately want to change their lives, and you're getting the clients who desperately want to change their lives, and none of them know what the fuck they're doing, and boom. And this happens in spirituality all the time. This happens, you know, sometimes, you know, maybe it worked. Like messing around with sexuality and getting people upset, you know, that worked for me. It was a terrible, terrible time, but it worked. For others, it seems to have a very low success rate with people I've seen it tried on. But, you know, maybe if someone's super good at screening people, could happen. I've known a number of tantric teachers and, you know, huge crowds that they're attracting. Oh, come learn about sex and desire and spirituality and meet God through the pussy and the dick aligning. And you know, the one guy confided in me, he's like, hey, you know, the woman that I do, and he wasn't attracted to her whatsoever. But the woman that also runs these classes with me, she's like basically suicidal. She hates her life. She's and like, unless I fuck her after class, I'm afraid she's gonna overdose on drugs. But people are like going to these people for like vast spiritual guidance and heal me of my sexual judgments and I'm not saying there aren't people who are good at this, but I'm saying there's a lot of people who need the help, who aren't in a place where they're healthy. And there are the real, truly super predatory people, and there are people who mean well, and there are people who mean well who gradually become more predatory the more opportunities they have. You know, you get something to work one time. Oh, this girl had bad sexual experience, and you know, I was nice to her, and now she wants to have a boyfriend. That's good. That's a step in the right direction rather than her being shut down. But it quickly becomes, it's so easy to become, okay, well, I don't care if you have a partner or not. I don't care, you know, that you're bending over backwards to try and become whoever I want because you're exactly my type. You're what I always wanted. So come on, baby. Like, it's so easy to fall into this dangerous place. Now, to talk a bit more on the Aubrey Alana thing. The sense that I have, and again, I don't know them personally. One thing that they said over and over and over and over and over in this podcast was, don't do what we're doing. We do not recommend this. It hurts. It's messy. It's destructive. But it's what we're trying to figure out. We're trying to figure out how it's very difficult on us. And this takes us into a gray area. You know, sometimes you're in a situation where you have feelings for multiple people. You get confused. How am I going to manage it? Well, choose one and repress all my feelings or cut them both off. And then this is why a lot of people cheat. Well, I love my husband, but he's working all the time and this guy's available and he's nice and he really gets me and where I am in my life now. And he gives me the care that my husband's not giving me. And there's a lot of these dynamics, and I'm not justifying them by any means. I'm telling you that people don't know exactly how to do it. And the way that Aubrey, Vailana, and Alana are doing it is that they're trying to take a calculated risk to try and experience this flow of love. And on one hand, it seems like there is movement, that there is insight, that there is expanded opportunity for love that rises. On the other hand, you could clearly see that there's a lot of insecurity, a lot of fear, a lot of doubt that's rising from this. I'm not the person to say that adults shouldn't try it. I shouldn't do that. The trio, they said time and time and time again, hey, monogamy is probably the best thing for most people. Most people cannot have a healthy relationship with one person, let alone getting more people involved. That makes it way more complicated. But if as an adult, now, one of the things that I noticed personally when I went through my experiences, on one hand, my jealousy, my shame, my controlling and overprotective and some of these qualities, those went away to an enormous degree, and a vast number of insecurities and fears and doubts. And I really did feel really well. On the other hand, I lost the ability to stand up for myself. In that process, I became a doormat. I would shut down. If I didn't agree with anything, I did the work. I was looking inside, I was breathing, I was feeling my emotions, living through what I have inside as richly as I could. But if I disagreed, I wouldn't say anything. There was one instance that I remember particularly hurt me. There was a girl that I basically had like a love at first sight thing at a seminar. We didn't really talk for a couple of years, and then eventually I reached out and I told her. And, then we were talking every day, and, I had very, very, very intense feelings for her, and it seemed to be mutual. And she came over, we spent some time together. Then we went to a seminar, we spent some time together. And like very quickly, our teacher, who basically wanted to have her too in like a threesome kind of deal, he talked her into just going with him. And then he was willing to talk some other chicks into going with me. But I was really heartbroken. I didn't want to. I wasn't interested in the other girls that were like being offered to me. I wanted what I wanted. Eventually, I did hook up with somebody who became a seminar organizer, but it didn't have the cathartic emotional healing kind of thing. It did a lot for my self-esteem because she was the most physically perfect woman that I had been with. And I used to have very low self-esteem, and that for someone like that to be attracted by me and be super impressed by me, that was kind of healing in a certain way. But again, this guy's just taking both girls now, and he's like, no, you go fuck this one, you do this, you do, and again, often at seminars I had, whether I was giving seminars myself or attending like larger events, I had many, many, many opportunities. But it was a particular stinging thing that, okay, this one that really matters to me. We already went through this, and like you had to talk her out of it. Like a day and a half into us being here, you had to talk her into going to your room and spending time with you. Like to me, it stung of a dick move. And the fact that like she didn't argue at all. She's just like, yes, master. I can't wait to gobble that knob. Like, there was a lot of disappointment. But I often sometimes I talk about it because they'd say, Shawn, you need to talk about it. But in general, when I had these complaints, I wouldn't say anything. I would just stay quiet and look at my disagreement with reality or disagreement with what's being presented to me. And I did that for so many years. Yeah, I did have a beneficial thing in all the emotions I worked through, but I also shrank. And my ability to stand up for myself, to stop being a doormat, that took me a few years to work through. And I think that may be what's happening in the Aubrey, Vailana, Alana situation. I think, yes, they probably are growing, discovering new things, taking calculated risk like a climber going up a steep mountain without equipment. And they're enjoying some of the benefits of that. At the same time, there's a lot of other nonsense going along with it. And by other nonsense, I mean they're probably getting little compensations in their psyche, in their behavior. That's while they're expanding in one area, they might be shrinking in another. Now, I can't say that for certain. I don't know. Maybe they will become like me and become a little more like doormats, or Aubrey might develop a quality to overstep more, or whatever the case may be. These things can be such messy situations. When we're talking about sex, when we're talking about desire, love, it could be very confusing. You know, at one point when I was doing a lot of love practices, I would feel this explosive bliss all the time, no matter who I looked at or if nobody was there, right? And so when women would offer themselves to me at seminars, I'd feel this great love. It's just like, okay, cool. You know, pretty girl wants to fuck. Awesome. At the same time, I get the sense that there's something that was missing in that. The personal touch, the personal connection wasn't there. You know, I had feelings of love, had nothing to do with the girl. I had, I was happy to listen to them, to talk to them, to help them, to do anything I could to support them in what they're going through. There wasn't any type of commitment, loyalty, exclusivity. It was just like another dish I was trying. There's a certain distance in that. And I didn't get that for a long time. How could I feel love and do a lot of loving acts for somebody, even hundreds of hours for some people, and not have a connection, not have some, and still be closed off to them, still be distant from them? I thought that was the way it was supposed to be, but I learned much over this time, and I see that I've committed an error. One of the things that Vailana was saying in their podcast was, on one end, from a higher level, she could see, oh yeah, there's a lot of potential to grow and beauty in this opportunity. And on the other end, if there's a lot of pain and a lot of shit that's arguing. And I experienced that myself. I experienced, when I was going through these types of things, moments where, oh yeah, I see the opportunity. And I can feel the potential for, okay, when I get through this, I'm not going to be so insecure. I'm going to feel better. I'm going to have more freedom in my heart. But at the time, there might be vast disagreements, a lot of fighting, a lot of projected anger and fear. So at the end of the day, when I look at what Aubrey and Vylana and Alana are doing, when I'm looking at this, I see three people who are trying to figure out something that's complicated for them. They have very powerful feelings and they're not sure exactly what to do with it. Is there some spiritual connection or whatever that's guidance in there? I don't know. I don't know any of them personally. I'm not going to judge. It's easy for people to write it off as total nonsense, but many of them haven't experienced what I have. The growing through the very difficult and complicated things. I had so many of these relationships where the other person was somehow in some way connected to somebody, or if they weren't dating, wanted to be dating that somebody else, and I was like a second choice, or I was too exalted in their view to actually be available to them, but they wanted me and not to, and many of these types of fucking scenarios. If I hadn't experienced actual development and movement in my process, I would probably be in the camp of it's all bullshit and, he's lying or there's manipulation or something, or they're all deluded as hell. Having watched this podcast and the other ones where they were talking about relationships, I am inclined to think that they're people sincere on the path. They're trying to get better. They're trying to figure out this thing called life. They're trying to learn how to navigate love and emotions and all of this sort of thing. In this particular scenario, I don't think is there some shadow motivation where really it's not God talking, Aubrey is just like really wanting both of these girls to be his wives, that maybe that's there, maybe. And maybe, Vylana might have some insecurities where she's more prone to, submitting to so that the other person gets what they want. Maybe. I don't know. I'm not there. I'm not in their minds. I don't know them. I think consciously these are three people who are trying to figure something out, and it's complicated for them. I don't think it's any kind of conscious effort to abuse from anybody's part. I think a lot of the people who are complaining haven't had this type of experience, so can't relate. I remember watching an argument on my Facebook wall years ago, and two people were talking, and I think I brought this up on a previous podcast, but I'll share it again. One woman said, "Hey, ultimate freedom, ultimate self-respect is allowing myself to have sex with whoever I want, because I could feel love in new ways. I can experience new flavors of life. I can be intimate. I can be myself. I can show who I really am at the deepest levels. I can connect. I can find new things that I wouldn't find if I was just dedicated to one partner." And the other woman who was arguing was like, "Well, no, when I think about this, I think, well, you're not special. There's nothing important about you. You're just giving yourself out like trash. You're casting yourself to the wind and letting the rats chew on you. Anybody could take whatever they want from you because you have no value. You don't matter. You don't exist. You are trash. You're just being used and discarded." And just adopting one of these meanings in the moment isn't going to change anything. But what is the pattern of thinking, feeling, and perceiving that you've repeated the most through your life? And if one of those has been repeated a very substantial amount, your thinking is going to resemble that. The way you view these things are going to be more similar to that. Being a very monogamous-minded person, but having gone through periods of insecurity and low self-esteem where I allowed myself to be in different types of relationships that I otherwise wouldn't be for a few years. Allowing myself to share partners or flirt with people who were in other arrangements, or to sleep with people who were in other arrangements, or to do all this kind of thing. I could tell you it's messy. I'll share an experience. So, Aubrey talks about having these mystical experiences. One where he met Vailana and he saw like his third eye light up and like look at this girl. And, the voice, Aubrey, go on the dating app. And then when he saw Alana's picture, get her, pick this one, this kind of thing. So the first time I invented a person from scratch in my mind to masturbate, I remember exactly what this woman looked like. I was young. But I remember exactly what she looked like. I remember her face, her body style, her hair, the way, everything, her skin tone, everything I remember. Years go by. Years. Probably around 2013, 14, somewhere in there. I get a message from somebody that I'm not friends with, but we happen to have a few mutual friends, okay? Somebody I've never heard of. I'm like, okay, who is this? And she reaches out to me and she says, I had this dream where I'm hearing your voice and your name repeated in my head. It's like Shiva, Shawn, Shiva, Shawn, Shiva, Shawn, Shiva, Shawn, Shiva, Shawn. And by the way, I had several people say that, they had like rituals that they did to Shiva and Krishna, and then all of a sudden I come to mind for whatever reason. And then all of a sudden they felt their hearts and bodies open to me more, all this kind of thing. Or where I appeared in their dreams and, this. But anyway, so that's kind of aligned with what this girl was saying. And she's like, anyway, Shiva, Shawn, Shiva, Shawn, Shiva, Shawn. And I just felt such intense sexual desire. And I thought I would just look on Facebook. And your name was the first one that popped up. And it turns out we have some mutual friends. And when I look at you, I feel it's connected to my dream. It has to be you. And this is super weird. I'm just telling you. And so we had an interesting dialogue, but she was involved with a guy. And I was like, okay, well, we both have this weird connection. Well, I didn't tell her. But I'm like, yeah, I also feel this desire. And I didn't tell her about my dream, my fantasy. And I'm like, okay, well, nice to know. And we didn't really talk about it for years and years and years. It might have been 2015 when she reached out to me. Anyway, skip ahead. We started talking in 2020 about it. And it's just like, and I told her about my fantasy. It's like, you are legitimately this person that I fantasized about. Your face, your lips, your eyes, your skin tone, your nose, your hair, your body. You are exactly this person. She's still with that guy. And like, I wasn't trying to poach her. I wasn't trying to get her away from him. But we just had this really crazy, powerful feelings of love and sexual attraction. And it's just like, what do we do with this? Well, nothing. We always knew I'd push away from her. We talked about it. We joked about it, I even tried to have but I also had to have a confidence in getting over self-hatred, which was something she really struggled with. And I wanted to help her with that. But the more I talked, the more she opened up. And then, the desires got stronger. And like, she was with this guy still. And I'm just like, I don't want to do this. And eventually, I tried to have a student of mine guide her through some of the advice as like an intermediary, and that didn't seem to be the best, because I was trying to have more distance with her, and eventually we talked again, and eventually we pushed away from each other, and then she had a kid with this guy and all that kind of thing. But my solution in this case, because I developed my filtration system and I don't want to mess with people's relationships anymore. But we talked for a few months pretty intensely, and it was just like, fuck, I need you to go. She went away, and I hope she's happy. But sometimes you end up in these situations and you don't want to, but for some reason, your feelings or your understanding or some kind of connection or something pops up that's like magic. And you're like, what's going on? And it doesn't fit into your lifestyle. It doesn't fit into your belief system. Now, I'm not saying that I'm monogamous. I don't want to share a girl. I don't want to have any kind of, I don't want to mess around with that kind of thing. But it's so easy to end up in that type of situation. And Aubrey and Vylana and Alana, they are trying to figure it out. They're trying to figure out a way to make it work. And, so the three of them are like equal partners in this. And, they're all allowed to play outside of that. I don't know or care what the rules or parameters for that are, but that's what they're doing. As for the different narratives, is it the predatory man trying to manipulating two women into being his concubines, or are they super powerful women choosing to embrace extreme vulnerability for the sake of expanded love? I don't know them, but I get the sense that everybody's trying to make sense of their arrangement. There are so many of these dynamics when spiritual people or people in general, like people get together for weird reasons. Sometimes it's, hey, someone needs a place to stay, so they're married, or they get into a partnership, or somebody needs money, or somebody is just so desperate for affection they're going to bend and twist themselves to become whoever the fuck that person wants. And then that's a lie, because they're not really with the person. The role they're playing is with that person. They're not really connected. They have this intermediary device between them. We all do very, very unhealthy. I won't say we all. So many of us do or have done very, very unhealthy things in our relationships, and have experimented with things and have found, oh, this works for me or this doesn't work for me. Well, it's not my place to judge, not my role to discern. What I will say is that I applaud their effort to try and figure it out, and their openness with the world and sharing this. And I urge everybody who's engaging in these dialogues to have a little compassion for everybody involved. And while you may fall on one side of the aisle versus another, understand that, these are people who are in a complicated situation. They're trying to figure it out. It might not be complicated to you. You might just shut down and push both people out of your lives, or shut one down and keep the other. But then you have to deal with the pain and the confusion and the endless cycle of what ifs. What if I went with this person, not that person? What if they kept them both? Could I have made it work? There's not this clean cut answer that we want there to be. There's not always this one safe and certain thing that we want to have. There's just people on the path like we are. And I've talked before about situationships and how easy it is for people to end up in these crazy circumstances that they don't really want to be in. We're like, well, I'm gonna be with this person and hope that one day they want something serious with me. Or I usually think that leads to a mess, but people have to try it out. People have to answer their own questions. Sometimes there are certainly healthier ways if you're going to have many people involved, there's certain healthier ways to do it than others, involving extreme communication, protocols for, if there's an escalation in feelings or intentions or desires or goals or, STD checks, and everyone has to have certain things done. There are certainly better ways to do it than just like often what I've seen in spiritual communities. I'm not saying this is always the case. What I've often seen in more poly kind of things is one person wants it, the other person doesn't. But the person who doesn't is too insecure, doesn't want to lose the other entirely. And so they'll just accept that they're just like a secondary person, or they're sharing this individual because they don't want to lose everything. So instead they'll just endure the pain. That's a calculation they're making. I wish everything were more clean cut. I wish everything could just be handled logically. But if we're honest, so much of what we do isn't logical. So much of our lives isn't logical. It takes us into this murky gray area where there's a lot of pain, a lot of concern, a lot of frustration. And I've seen a lot of people try and teach true sex in an honest way. And I've seen a lot of people start that way and gradually get into messier areas. I've certainly made mistakes doing this kind of thing. And there are certainly people that I, in hindsight, would not have gotten involved with. But we don't know at the time how things are going to play out. Hindsight is always 20/20. And we just have to move forward. And we have to respect the rights of other people to make decisions on the path. Remember, Aubrey, Vailana, and Alana are not endorsing this. They're not saying other people should try it. They're not saying anybody else should try it. But they're saying it's a calculated risk that they're taking. They actually all recommend a classical monogamous relationship, even though that's not what they're practicing. And so I don't know what's right for you. I don't know how life is going to unfold before your eyes. I don't know what your preferences are. But I encourage that we have compassion for people on all sides of the aisle, whether it's the people who've been hurt by people in predatory spiritual paths, or in a relationship or a confusing situation, or people who found themselves hurting others and didn't realize they were slipping in that slope. People who end up in situationships and they're just justifying everything using spiritual jargon. We have to have compassion for these people, and whatever happens, I hope you and them and all of us end up in a place of fulfillment and profound growth and deep, deep love. Whatever form that might take, whatever may be appropriate to you or them or any of us. That's pretty much all I got to say on this topic, for now anyway. Rock on. Party on. This is Shawn, signing out.